My stepdaughter told me to know my place in their house. So, I knew exactly where I belonged, gone, along with my financial contributions. You know what's funny about being told to know your place? Most people assume you'll just shrink into whatever corner they've mentally assigned you. They never consider that maybe, just maybe, you'll decide your place is somewhere they can't reach you at all. I should probably start from the beginning, though I'm still not sure where that actually is anymore. Was it when I married David 3 years ago, thinking I was getting a loving husband and maybe, eventually, a relationship with his teenage daughter? Or was it last Tuesday, when 17-year-old Madison looked me dead in the eye and delivered the line that changed everything? Let me paint you a picture first. David's one of those men who looks good on paper, successful attorney, nice house in the suburbs, talks a good game about family values. The kind of guy who'll hold doors open and remember anniversaries, but somehow never quite remembers that his daughter treats his wife like something he tracked in on his shoe. 6'2" with salt and pepper hair that makes him look distinguished in court, and this way of talking that makes people believe he's got everything under control. Classic golden retriever energy on the surface, but underneath? Well, let's just say even golden retrievers can be selectively blind when it suits them. Madison's been living with us full-time since her mother decided to find herself in Costa Rica 2 years ago. Apparently, finding yourself requires abandoning your teenage daughter and leaving your ex-husband to figure out parenting while his new wife gets to play evil stepmother without any of the actual authority. Thanks, Jennifer. Really appreciate you sticking around for the hard parts. And from day one, this kid made it crystal clear that I was temporary furniture at best. Not in obvious ways that David might notice. Oh no, she's way too smart for that. Madison inherited her father's legal mind and her mother's talent for manipulation. More like death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one so small that complaining about it would make me look petty and unstable. You know those little moments that make you question your own sanity? Like when I'd buy groceries and find my yogurt missing, but she'd swear she never touched it while literally eating said yogurt. The spoon would still be in her mouth, Greek honey vanilla dripping down her chin, and she'd look at me with these wide, innocent eyes. I bought my own, she'd say, gesturing vaguely toward the fridge where, miraculously, an identical container would appear, usually the cheap store brand she'd switched my expensive organic one for. Or how she'd monopolize the TV in the living room every single evening, sprawled across the sectional like she owned it, remote clutched in her death grip, then absolutely shocked when I suggested maybe we could take turns. Oh, I didn't realize you wanted to watch something, she'd say with this perfectly innocent expression that made me want to scream. I mean, I was here first, but if it's really important to you. The guilt trips were masterful. This girl could make you feel selfish for wanting basic consideration in your own home. She'd learned early that playing the victim of divorce always worked on adults. Poor Madison, shuffled between households, abandoned by her mother, struggling to adjust. Never mind that she lived better than most adults I knew, or that her biggest struggle was choosing between 3 different streaming services. David, bless his oblivious heart, would just laugh it off. Girls being girls, he'd say with that indulgent chuckle that made my teeth ache, like we were both 16 and fighting over lip gloss instead of a grown woman trying to exist peacefully in her own home while his daughter systematically undermined every boundary I tried to set. I'd try to explain it to him sometimes, usually late at night when we were getting ready for bed, and I was feeling particularly beaten down by another day of subtle warfare. She's doing it on purpose, David. The food thing, the TV thing, the way she talks to me when you're not around. He'd pause in brushing his teeth, this patient expression crossing his face that I'd learned to hate. Sarah, honey, she's 17. Teenagers are self-centered by definition. It's not personal. It feels pretty personal when she tells her friends I'm not her real mom and never will be. Within earshot. While I'm making dinner. She's still processing the divorce. These things take time. Time. Everything with David came down to time. Give it time. She needs time. In time, she'll come around. As if time were this magical force that would eventually transform his spoiled, manipulative daughter into someone who saw me as anything other than an obstacle to overcome. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me tell you about the 3 years leading up to last Tuesday, the slow, soul-crushing education and exactly how much you can give up of yourself before there's nothing left to give. I moved in with them 6 months after David and I got married. We'd done the whole taking it slow for Madison's sake dance, which meant I got to maintain my own apartment while spending every free moment at their house, trying to prove I was worthy of inclusion in their little family unit. The apartment I paid for but never used. The bills I covered while also contributing to their household. The careful balance of being helpful without overstepping, present without imposing. Madison was 15 then, still young enough that I thought maybe, with enough patience and understanding, we could build something resembling a relationship. I wasn't trying to replace her mother, just hoping to be someone she could trust, maybe even like eventually. I was so naive. The first month was actually okay. Madison was polite enough, testing boundaries but not outright hostile. She thanked me when I drove her places, helped with homework when asked, even complimented dinner a few times. I thought we were making progress. Then Jennifer called from Costa Rica, 3 weeks into my new living arrangement, sobbing about how much she missed her daughter and how guilty she felt for leaving. Madison spent 2 hours on that phone call, then didn't speak to me for a week. Suddenly, every attempt at connection was met with stone-cold silence or barely concealed irritation. She's confused, David explained when I mentioned the sudden shift. Jennifer calling stirred up a lot of emotions. Just be patient. Patience. The virtue I was apparently supposed to possess in unlimited quantities while his daughter worked through her feelings by making my life miserable. The food stealing started around month 2. Small things at first, a few crackers from my special box, the last of my favorite tea. When I'd mention it, Madison would look genuinely confused. Are you sure you didn't finish it yourself? I mean, we all live here. That phrase became her favorite weapon, we all live here. Used to justify taking my things, using my bathroom products, borrowing my clothes without asking. But when I tried to treat the house like it was actually ours to share, suddenly it was different rules. Those are my dishes, she'd say when I'd use the plates she'd picked out with her dad before I moved in. That's my spot, when I'd sit in what I thought was just another chair on the sectional. Dad and I always watch this show together. When I try to join them for something I'd actually introduce them to. Every space I tried to inhabit became contested territory, every routine I attempted to join was actually a sacred tradition between father and daughter that I was intruding on. I found myself getting smaller and smaller, occupying less space, asking permission for things that should have been automatic in my own home. David never saw it. Madison was too smart to be openly rude when he was around. Instead, she'd wait until he left the room, then make her little comments. You know, Dad was so much happier before he started worrying about making other people comfortable all the time. It's weird having someone else's stuff mixed in with ours. The house doesn't feel like home anymore. I miss when it was just me and Dad. Things were simpler then. Each comment delivered with this wistful, innocent tone that made it impossible to call out without sounding paranoid. And if I did mention them to David, she'd deny everything or twist it into something harmless. I was just saying I miss the old days sometimes. Is that wrong? I mean, divorce is hard on kids. I thought Sarah would understand that. The gaslighting was so subtle, so consistent, that I started doubting my own perceptions. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was expecting too much too soon. Maybe this was just normal stepfamily growing pains, and I needed to try harder to be understanding. So I tried harder. I bought Madison's favorite snacks, even when she never thanked me. I drove her to friends' houses and activities without complaint, even when she spent the entire car ride texting and ignoring me. I helped her with school projects, covered for her when she missed curfew, even lied to David about her grades when she begged me not to tell him about a failed test. I thought I was building trust. She thought I was proving how easily manipulated I was. The financial stuff started gradually too. Sarah, could you grab milk on your way home? Became Sarah, we're out of groceries became Sarah, can you handle the grocery run this week? Before I knew it, I was doing all the shopping and paying for most of it, because it was just easier than fighting about splitting costs or keeping track of who owed what. Same with utilities, maintenance, all the little expenses that keep a household running. David would mention that the internet bill had gone up, and I'd offer to cover the difference. The landscaping service would need an extra treatment for grubs, and somehow I'd end up paying for it. Madison would need new school clothes, and David would be cash-strapped from some unexpected legal expense, so I'd step in. Just temporarily, he'd always say, I'll pay you back next month. Next month never came. There was always another expense, another cash flow issue, another reason why he couldn't quite get caught up. But I was contributing, I was helping, I was proving that I was a good partner who could be counted on. What I was actually doing was enabling two people to take advantage of my generosity while giving me nothing in return but the privilege of being tolerated in my own home. The breaking point should have been Madison's 16th birthday party. I'd planned the whole thing, sent invitations, ordered the cake, decorated the backyard, coordinated with David to make sure all her friends could come. I'd even bought her the expensive camera she'd been wanting for months, the one David said they couldn't afford. She opened that gift in front of everyone, held it up for pictures, posted about it on social media. My dad got me the camera I've been wanting forever. Best birthday ever. Not Sarah got me. Not my parents got me. Dad got me. When I tried to gently correct her later, she looked at me with this perfectly innocent expression. Well, technically Dad paid you back for it, right? So it's from him. He hadn't paid me back. We both knew he hadn't paid me back. But she was already spinning it, already rewriting history to erase my contribution while making sure she got credit for being gracious about receiving it. I mean, if it's really important to you to get credit, I can make another post, she offered with fake sweetness that made me want to throw the camera in the pool. That night, I told David I first felt unappreciated and invisible. He held me while I cried and promised he'd talk to Madison about being more acknowledging of everything I did for their family. The next morning, Madison came downstairs with red eyes and a trembling voice. Sarah, I'm really sorry if I hurt your feelings yesterday. Dad explained how important it was for you to feel included, and I didn't realize you needed recognition for the party and stuff. I thought you did those things because you wanted to, not because you expected credit. The apology was perfectly crafted to make me look petty and needy while making her look mature and understanding. David beamed at her like she'd just delivered the Gettysburg Address, and I was trapped into accepting graciously or looking like a monster. Thank you for apologizing, Madison. I appreciate that. But things got worse after that conversation, not better. Madison became even more careful to exclude me in ways David couldn't see, even more skillful at making me feel like an outsider who was trying too hard to insert herself into places she didn't belong. The worst part was how she'd weaponized David's love for her. She'd wait until he was stressed about work or tired from a long day, then launch into these heartfelt speeches about how hard everything had been since her mom left, how she was trying so hard to adjust to all the changes, how she just wanted their family to feel stable again. "I know Sarah's trying too," she'd say with this trembling voice that made my stomach turn. "And I'm grateful for everything she does. I just sometimes miss when it was simpler, you know? When I didn't have to worry about whether I was making other people feel included or if I was doing something wrong." David would hold her and promise that she never had to worry about that this was her home and always would be, that no one expected her to be anything other than his daughter. And I'd stand there watching, realizing that every conversation I'd tried to have about feeling excluded had been turned into evidence of how much pressure Madison was under to accommodate me. I was the problem. I was the one making everyone's life harder by having needs and expectations. I was the one who needed to try harder to fit in, be more understanding, demand less. So I did. I made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding. I stopped bringing up issues with Madison's behavior. I stopped asking David to address problems I was having with his daughter. I just smiled and nodded and tried to be grateful for the scraps of acceptance I was thrown. But Madison wasn't satisfied with me being smaller. She wanted me gone. The campaign to drive me away intensified during her junior year. She'd sabotage plans we'd made by suddenly remembering conflicting commitments David needed to know about right now. She'd create emergencies that required immediate attention and financial contribution right when I had something important going on. She'd share intimate details about her relationship with David, inside jokes, memories from before I existed in their lives, future plans that somehow never included me, making sure I understood how peripheral I was to their real family unit. "Remember when we went to that little inn in Vermont, Dad? Just the two of us after Mom left? We should totally go back there sometime. Maybe this summer, just for a weekend. Like old times." Old times became her favorite phrase. Everything good had happened in old times, before I arrived to complicate their perfect little duo. The implication was always clear: things had been better before me, and they could be better again if I just wasn't there. David never saw it because Madison was brilliant at making these comments sound wistful and innocent rather than pointed. And when I tried to address them, I'd sound jealous and petty. "Of course you should spend time together," I'd say. "I just think it would be nice if sometimes these family traditions could include me too." "Sarah, you're being sensitive. She's not trying to exclude you. She's just processing her childhood and her relationship with me. That's healthy." "Healthy for whom, exactly?" "Not for me, sitting at home alone while they went on their special trips and had their special traditions that I was somehow always too new, too outside, too much of an imposition to be part of." I started having anxiety attacks. Real ones, where I'd wake up in the middle of the night unable to breathe, convinced that I was losing my mind. The house I was paying for didn't feel like home. The family I was supporting didn't feel like mine. I was pouring money, time, and emotional energy into a situation where I was barely tolerated, and I couldn't figure out how to fix it. I suggested family therapy. Madison cried and said she felt like she was being pathologized for struggling with her parents' divorce. David said we should try harder to work things out ourselves before involving outsiders. I suggested ground rules about shared spaces and responsibilities. Madison agreed to everything in front of David, then completely ignored every boundary we discussed the moment he left the house. I suggested we take a break from me contributing financially until we could sort out the family dynamics. David panicked and explained how much they needed my help, how unfair it would be to punish Madison for being a teenager by creating financial stress for the family. Every solution I proposed got twisted into evidence that I was either being unreasonable or punishing a child for acting like a child. I was trapped in this awful cycle where I couldn't address problems without being told I was the problem, but not addressing them meant they got worse. By year 3, I was a ghost in my own life. I went to work, came home, contributed money and labor, and tried to be invisible the rest of the time. Madison had trained me well. I knew my place was to be useful but not present, helpful but not included, grateful but not expectant. I thought that was just how stepfamilies worked. I thought I was learning to be a good stepmom by accepting less, expecting less, being less. Right up until last Tuesday, when Madison looked me in the eye and told me exactly what she thought my place was. I'd been having the week from hell at work. I'm a project manager for a mid-size marketing firm, which means I spend my days herding cats while getting blamed when the cats don't go where they're supposed to. 3 major accounts were imploding simultaneously. One client had decided they hated the campaign we'd spent 6 months developing, another was threatening to pull out because their contact person had quit and left no notes, and the third was demanding a complete rebrand with 2 weeks' notice. My boss, Patricia, was breathing down my neck about quarterly projections, asking why our client retention was down and what I was doing to fix it. Easy for her to ask from her corner office while I was working 14-hour days trying to put out fires with a team that was overworked and underpaid. You know that special kind of exhaustion where even your bones feel tired? Where you're so wired from stress that you can't sleep, but so depleted that you can barely function. That was me, dragging myself through the front door at nearly 9 p.m. after another day of crisis management, wanting nothing more than a hot shower and maybe some leftover Chinese food. The house was dark except for the kitchen light, and I could hear Madison on the phone in her room, probably gossiping about whatever drama was currently consuming the junior class. Her laugh drifted down the stairs, high and bright and completely unburdened by any awareness that other people in the house might be struggling. David was at some work dinner, another mandatory schmoozing event that seemed to happen whenever I needed support the most. These dinners had been getting more frequent lately, and he'd been coming home later and later, usually smelling like expensive wine and sometimes other things I didn't want to think too hard about. I dropped my purse on the counter with a thud that probably rattled the whole kitchen. My shoulders were killing me from hunching over my laptop all day, and I had a tension headache that felt like someone was slowly tightening a band around my skull. I opened the fridge, looking for those leftover spring rolls I'd been thinking about since lunch. The ones I'd specifically saved for myself and marked with my name on a sticky note because Madison had developed this convenient habit of forgetting what belonged to whom. Gone. Along with the Thai curry I'd earmarked for tomorrow's lunch and the fancy Greek yogurt I'd hidden behind the milk like some kind of food criminal in my own house. The sticky note was still there, crumpled and stuck to the shelf, my name clearly visible in my own handwriting. So this wasn't absent-minded teenage grazing. This was deliberate. I stood there staring into the nearly empty fridge, and something inside me just snapped. Not in a dramatic, explosive way. More like a rubber band that's been stretched too long finally reaching its breaking point and just quietly giving up. Normally I'd just sigh and make a sandwich. Pick my battles, keep the peace, don't be the evil stepmother who makes a big deal about food when there are bigger issues to worry about. All that nonsense we tell ourselves when we're slowly being driven insane by someone else's complete disregard for our basic needs. But something about that moment, standing there staring into an empty fridge after a soul-crushing day, seeing that stupid sticky note that had been completely ignored, knowing exactly where my carefully saved food had gone, just broke something inside me that had been holding on by threads for months. I marched upstairs, my work heels clicking against the hardwood with more force than necessary. Madison's door was closed, but I could still hear her on the phone, voice animated, as she talked to whoever was on the other end. Oh my gosh, you should have seen his face when she said that. I literally cannot even. I knocked. Sharp, authoritative raps that cut through her conversation. Hold on, she said to whoever she was talking to, then louder, yeah? The tone said everything. Not come in or just a minute or even what do you need? Just yeah? Like I was some kind of interruption she was barely tolerating. She opened the door wearing her favorite pajama set, the expensive one I bought her for Christmas, with that trademark expression of hers. This perfect blend of boredom and barely concealed contempt that teenagers have mastered since the dawn of time. Her phone was still pressed to her ear and she made no move to end her conversation or give me her full attention. Yeah? She repeated, making it clear that whatever I wanted had better be quick because I was interrupting something important. Did you eat my leftovers? She actually had the audacity to look confused, like this was some bizarre accusation coming out of nowhere. What leftovers? The spring rolls and curry from last night. The ones I put my name on. Oh, those. She shrugged, shifting her weight from one foot to the other like this conversation was physically painful for her. Yeah, I was hungry. There wasn't anything else. There wasn't anything else. In a kitchen full of food that I'd bought and paid for, including ingredients for probably a dozen different meals, she'd somehow been forced to eat the one thing I'd specifically claimed for myself. Madison, I had my name on those containers. I saved them for dinner tonight. She actually rolled her eyes. Actually rolled them, like I was some crazy person making unreasonable demands about food in my own house. I was hungry, she repeated with another shrug. Besides, it's not like you wrote do not touch or whatever. I didn't know it was that serious. I shouldn't have to write do not touch on food I bought for myself in my own house. And that's when she said it. That's when this 17-year-old girl, standing in the doorway of the room I was paying to keep a roof over, looked at me with all the casual cruelty that only teenagers can muster and delivered the line that would change everything. Your house? She let out this little laugh that was probably meant to sound amused but came out sharp and mean. You need to know your place here. This is me and Dad's house. You're just here. Just here. Like I was some random house guest who'd overstayed her welcome instead of the woman who'd been paying half the mortgage for 3 years. The woman who'd quietly absorbed her attitude, made excuses for her behavior, bought her gifts, driven her places, helped with homework, covered household expenses, and tried so desperately hard to be understanding because I knew divorce was hard on kids. Just here. I stood there for a moment, letting those words sink in while Madison turned back to her phone conversation like she hadn't just dropped a bomb in the middle of my life. Sorry about that, she said into the phone, her voice immediately shifting back to bright and animated. Stepmother drama. You know how it is. She started to close the door in my face, dismissing me like I was nothing more than an annoyance she'd dealt with, but I put my hand out to stop it. You're absolutely right, I said. She paused, phone still at her ear, probably surprised that I wasn't arguing or getting upset. I do need to know my place. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Something in my tone must have registered because she actually looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face, like maybe she'd pushed too hard this time. But it was too late. The words were out there, and they'd crystallized something I'd been trying not to see for 3 years. I went back downstairs, grabbed my laptop, and started doing math. Lots and lots of math. See, here's the thing about knowing your place, sometimes it means recognizing exactly how much power you actually have, and how much of it you've been giving away for free. I'd been paying half the mortgage since we got married. Not just half, I'd actually been paying more because David had convinced me that since I made slightly more money, it was only fair for me to contribute proportionally. The mortgage payment was $2,847 a month, and I'd been covering $1,600 of it. Then there were utilities, electricity, gas, water, trash, internet, that ridiculous premium cable package Madison insisted she needed for her studies. Another $400 a month, split evenly, except I'd been paying the overages when Madison decided she needed to stream 3 different shows simultaneously or when David ran the air conditioning like we were trying to freeze the entire neighborhood. Property taxes, homeowners insurance, PMI, all split 50-50, even though my name wasn't on the deed. David had explained that away by saying we'd add me to the title eventually, when the paperwork was less complicated. 3 years later, we were still waiting for the right time to deal with that paperwork. Groceries were almost entirely my responsibility at this point. Madison was a growing teenager with expensive tastes, and David was always too busy or too tired to shop. I'd been spending around $800 a month feeding a family of 3, plus all the special items Madison requested, the organic everything David preferred, the expensive wine for his business dinners. Then there were the extras, the pool maintenance service Madison had convinced David they needed, the landscaping company that kept their yard looking like a magazine spread, the cleaning service that came twice a month because nobody else wanted to do deep cleaning. Home repairs, maintenance, random expenses that kept popping up. I pulled 3 years of bank statements and started adding it up. The numbers were staggering. Mortgage contributions, $57,600 utilities, $14,400 property taxes and insurance, $12,000 groceries and household supplies, $28,800 services and maintenance, $8,400 miscellaneous expenses, repairs and Madison's various needs, $6,200, $127,400. In 3 years, I contributed $127,400 to maintaining a household where I was apparently just a temporary guest who needed to know her place. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was calculating what my share of the equity should be, based on my contributions. The house had been worth $425,000 when I moved in, and similar properties in the neighborhood were now selling for around $510,000. David had owed about $340,000 on the original mortgage. By my calculations, between mortgage payments and appreciation, there was roughly $170,000 in equity now. Based on my contributions, I should have been entitled to about $65,000 of that. $65,000 in equity for a house where I apparently didn't belong. I spent the next few hours making phone calls and sending emails. Amazing how much you can accomplish when you finally stop trying to make everyone else comfortable and start thinking about what you actually need. My first call was to Linda Hendricks, the lawyer who'd handled my divorce from my first marriage. She listened to my situation with the kind of professional sympathy that told me she'd heard variations of this story many times before. You have a strong case for reimbursement, she said after I'd gone through the numbers. Even without your name on the deed, the financial contributions you've made could be considered unjust enrichment, especially if you can document them well. I can. I've got bank statements, receipts, everything. Good. There's also the question of whether you've established any kind of common law interest in the property, but that's harder to prove and would take longer to litigate. The easier path is to demand reimbursement for contributions to expenses you shouldn't have been responsible for as a non-owner. My second call was to my sister Rachel, who lived about 40 minutes away in a condo she'd been trying to convince me to consider as a rental investment. I might need a place to stay for a while, I told her. Finally, she said. I've been waiting 3 years for you to come to your senses about this situation. You can stay as long as you need to. The guest room's yours. My third call was to Janet Morris, a real estate agent I'd worked with on a client project last year. I'd always liked her no-nonsense approach to everything. I need to see some properties, I told her. Something small, move-in ready, under $300,000. And I need to see them this weekend. Buyer's market right now, she said. I can set up appointments Saturday if you're serious about moving quickly. I'm serious. My fourth call was to Peterson and Associates, David's firm. I asked to speak to the office manager about some billing questions. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen is in depositions all day today, the receptionist told me. Can I take a message? Actually, I was calling about some recent client entertainment expenses. There seem to be some charges from Chez Laurent that don't match our records. Could you have someone from accounting call me back? Chez Laurent was the expensive French place downtown. David had supposedly been there twice this month for client dinners, but I checked their calendar of events, and they'd hosted a wine tasting for couples both nights he claimed to have been there. Funny coincidence. My fifth call was to my bank, to set up a new account that only I would have access to. By the time David got home at nearly midnight, smelling like expensive wine and wearing that slightly guilty expression he'd been sporting more and more lately, I had everything figured out. Hey, babe, he said, loosening his tie as he kicked off his shoes. Sorry I'm so late. Peterson wanted to hit that new place downtown, and you know how these things go. Once the clients start talking, you can't exactly excuse yourself. I did know how these things go. They went exactly like you'd expect when someone's been checked out of their marriage for months but doesn't have the guts to actually end it cleanly. We need to talk, I said from my spot on the couch, laptop still open with spreadsheets full of numbers that told the story of 3 years of financial manipulation. He froze halfway through taking off his jacket. That sounds ominous. Sit down, David. He sat in the chair across from me, and I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, probably trying to figure out what he might have done wrong and how to talk his way out of it. His lawyer brain was already working, looking for angles and explanations and ways to redirect the conversation. Your daughter told me I need to know my place in this house, I said without preamble. His face went through this interesting series of expressions: confusion, annoyance, then that particular look men get when they're about to defend someone who doesn't deserve it. Madison's just going through a phase. She's right, though. I cut him off before he could launch into his usual excuses about teenage behavior and adjustment periods and how much patience everything required. I do need to know my place. And I figured it out. I slid a folder across the coffee table. It was thick, full of bank statements and receipts and calculations that represented 3 years of contributions to a household where I was apparently just a guest. I've done some math. That's how much I've contributed to this household over the past 3 years. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, property taxes, insurance premiums, maintenance costs, even that ridiculous pool cleaning service Madison insisted you needed. David opened the folder with the cautious expression of someone who suspected he was about to see something he didn't want to see. I watched his face go pale as he scanned the numbers, his lawyer brain immediately understanding the implications. It was more than he'd expected, significantly more. I'd been very, very thorough. I'd also calculated what my share of the equity should be, based on my contributions. It's all documented, with receipts and bank statements. My lawyer says it's pretty straightforward. Your lawyer? His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Linda Hendricks. You remember her, she handled my first divorce. Turns out when you pay for half of everything but your name isn't on the deed, there are laws about that. Who knew? I leaned back against the couch cushions, feeling calmer than I had in months. There was something liberating about finally having all the cards on the table, about not pretending anymore that this situation was sustainable or fair. But here's the thing, David. I don't actually want to fight you for half the house. I don't want to drag this through the courts and make everything ugly, especially with Madison being so close to graduation. Relief flickered across his face, quickly followed by suspicion. 3 years of marriage had taught him to be wary when I was being reasonable about things that should make me angry. What do you want? I want out. Clean, simple, no drama. I want my financial contributions returned, not as equity, just as reimbursement for expenses I shouldn't have been paying as a non-owner. I want my name off all the bills and accounts, effective immediately. And I want to be gone by the weekend. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd never said and probably never would. David looked like he was trying to solve a complex equation, probably figuring out how he was going to cover all those expenses on his own once his personal ATM walked away. You can't be serious. Your daughter made it very clear that this is your house, not mine. So I'm respecting that. I'm going where I actually belong, which is anywhere but here. I closed my laptop and stood up, smoothing down my wrinkled work clothes. I'll be staying at Rachel's until I find a place. The moving truck comes Saturday morning. I've already arranged for my last utility payments to process Friday night, so you'll want to call and set up new accounts in your name. And if I don't agree to this? If I fight the financial stuff? I smiled, and something in my expression must have warned him, because he actually leaned back in his chair like he was trying to put distance between us. Then we do this the hard way. Divorce proceedings, asset division, me asking for spousal support based on the lifestyle I've become accustomed to during our marriage. I'll subpoena your financial records, including those business dinner expenses that don't quite add up. I'll have my lawyer depose everyone at your firm about your recent work habits and client entertainment practices. I paused, letting that sink in while watching his face cycle through several shades of pale. Did you really think I didn't notice the credit card charges, David? Chez Laurent on Tuesday nights when you said you were working late? The same restaurant that hosts couples wine tastings every Tuesday? Or the fact that you've been coming home smelling like someone else's perfume for the past 6 months? His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. How did you know my place, remember? My place is being 3 steps ahead of people who underestimate me. I gathered up my papers and headed toward the stairs. Oh, and David? You might want to have a conversation with your daughter about gratitude. Because the gravy train just left the station, and she's about to learn exactly how much my financial contributions were actually worth. I was halfway up the stairs when he called after me, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. What am I supposed to tell Madison? I paused, my hand on the banister, and looked back at him. He looked smaller somehow, shrunk into that chair like a man who'd just realized he'd been playing poker with someone who'd been counting cards the whole time. Tell her she got exactly what she wanted. She wanted it to be just you two in your house? Congratulations. Now it is. The next few days were a blur of packing, paperwork, and phone calls. Amazing how quickly you can untangle a life when you're not trying to spare everyone else's feelings or protect them from the consequences of their own actions. I took Thursday and Friday off work, claiming a family emergency. Which wasn't technically a lie. My family emergency was that I'd finally realized I deserved to be treated like family instead of like hired help. Madison was out when I started packing on Thursday morning, probably at school, though I suspected David had arranged for her to be elsewhere to avoid the drama. She'd been avoiding me since Tuesday night anyway, probably sensing that something had shifted in the household dynamic. Smart girl. Too bad she hadn't been smart enough to realize that pushing people too far usually backfires. I started with my clothes, methodically folding and packing everything I'd brought into this house 3 years ago. It was startling how little space my belongings actually took up when they weren't mixed in with everyone else's stuff. 3 years of trying to blend into their lives, and I could fit everything that was actually mine into 6 boxes and 2 suitcases. The movers would handle the furniture I'd brought, my grandmother's antique dresser, the reading chair from my apartment, the artwork I'd inherited from my parents. Everything else could stay. I didn't want their sectional sofa or their king-size bed or any of the shared purchases that came with shared memories I no longer wanted to carry. While I packed, I made phone calls. First, to all the utilities and services, canceling my responsibility for payments effective Friday at midnight. The customer service representatives were surprisingly understanding when I explained I was removing myself from accounts due to divorce proceedings. You'll want to make sure the primary account holder sets up new payment methods, the electric company rep warned me. Otherwise service could be interrupted. I'll be sure to mention that, I said, making a note to do exactly that in my goodbye letter. Next, I called my credit card companies to make sure David couldn't make any charges on cards where he was an authorized user. Turned out he'd been using my platinum card for those mysterious business dinners. The charges were all there in black and white, expensive meals for 2 at romantic restaurants, wine tastings, even a weekend at a boutique hotel in Napa that he'd supposedly gone to alone for depositions. Amazing how much evidence people leave behind when they assume no one's paying attention. My lawyer called Thursday afternoon with good news. David's attorney contacted me, Linda said. They want to settle quickly and quietly. Full reimbursement of documented expenses, no contest on the divorce, clean separation of assets. How quickly? They're proposing to have everything finalized within 30 days. Very unusual for them to move this fast, unless they're worried about what might come up in discovery. I smiled, remembering David's face when I'd mentioned those credit card charges. They should be worried. Friday morning, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I slept until I woke up naturally, then made myself breakfast without worrying about leaving enough food for anyone else or checking to see what Madison might want. The kitchen felt different somehow. Lighter. Like a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying had suddenly been lifted off my shoulders. I was scrambling eggs when Madison finally made an appearance, shuffling downstairs in her pajamas with that sulky expression that meant she'd been ordered to talk to me and didn't want to. Dad says you're moving out, she said without preamble, sliding onto one of the kitchen stools. That's right. Because of what I said? I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was beautiful, I had to admit that. 17 and golden and completely unaware of how much damage her casual cruelty could inflict. In another life, if things had been different, I might have enjoyed watching her grow up. No, Madison. Because of what you made me realize. She picked at her cuticles, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Yes, you did. I turned back to my eggs, not willing to let her off the hook with a half-hearted non-apology. And you were right. I did need to know my place. I just meant, you meant that I don't belong here. That this is your house with your dad, and I'm just some outsider you have to tolerate. I slid my eggs onto a plate and turned to face her. And you're absolutely right. I don't belong in a place where I'm not wanted. Her face crumpled a little, and for a moment she looked like the scared 15-year-old who'd lost her mother instead of the manipulative, almost adult who'd been making my life miserable for 3 years. But where will you go? Somewhere I'm appreciated, I said simply. Somewhere my contributions matter and my presence is actually welcome. I sat down with my breakfast, and we ate in silence, me enjoying my eggs, her picking at a piece of toast she'd grabbed from the counter. Dad's really stressed, she said eventually. I imagine he is. Turns out I was contributing more to this household than either of you realized. He said something about money. About bills. I nodded. All those expenses I was helping with? The ones you never had to think about because they just magically got paid? Your dad's going to have to cover them himself now. But we can't afford, she stopped herself, probably realizing how that sounded. Can't afford what, Madison? Can't afford the premium cable package you insisted you needed? Can't afford the pool service you had to have? Can't afford the expensive groceries I've been buying for the past 3 years? Her face flushed. I didn't know you were paying for all that stuff. Of course you didn't know. Because you never had to think about it. You just assumed that food appeared in the fridge and bills got paid and services got rendered because that's how life works when you're 17 and someone else is handling all the adult responsibilities. I finished my eggs and rinsed my plate in the sink. But here's the thing, I wasn't your parent. I wasn't obligated to provide for you. I did it because I was trying to be part of your family, trying to contribute to a household I thought I belonged in. You could still. No. I cut her off before she could finish whatever plea she was about to make. I could still what? Keep paying for things while you treat me like an unwelcome guest? Keep contributing to a household where I'm told I need to know my place? She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. I'm sorry, she said finally, so quietly I almost missed it. I'm sure you are. Now that the consequences are real. That's not fair. I laughed, and it came out sharper than I'd intended. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you treating me with basic respect from day one. Fair would have been your father insisting on that instead of making excuses for your behavior. Fair would have been me being included in family decisions instead of being told I need to know my place. I grabbed my purse and keys from the counter. But you know what? Life isn't fair, Madison. And sometimes people who take advantage of others' generosity find out that generosity has limits. I was almost to the door when she called after me. Are you ever coming back? I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, and considered the question. Was there any scenario where I could come back to this house, this family, this life where I'd made myself so small I'd almost disappeared? No, I said without turning around. I'm not. The moving truck arrived Saturday morning at exactly 8 a.m. I'd hired a full-service company, the kind that packs everything for you and handles all the heavy lifting. Worth every penny to avoid having to negotiate with David about who would help or when it was convenient for them. Madison stayed in her room the entire time, music blasting behind her closed door. David hovered around the edges, looking lost and slightly panicked as he watched 3 years of shared life get loaded into cardboard boxes. Sarah, he said as the movers carried out my grandmother's dresser. Are you sure about this? We could work things out, go to counseling, figure out how to make this work. I looked at him, this man I'd thought I'd loved, thought I'd built a future with, and felt nothing but tired relief. David, when was the last time you defended me to your daughter? When was the last time you made her apologize for treating me badly? When was the last time you prioritized our marriage over her comfort? He opened his mouth, then closed it, apparently unable to come up with an answer. That's what I thought. The movers finished loading around noon. I did one final walkthrough of the house, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. It was strange how empty the rooms looked without my things, how little evidence remained that I'd ever lived there at all. I left my keys on the kitchen counter, along with a manila envelope containing final utility bills, account information, and a detailed list of everything that would need to be transferred to David's name. I also left Madison a note, stuck to her bathroom mirror right next to the expensive face wash I'd been buying for her because she'd mentioned liking it once. Madison, you were right. I needed to know my place, and now I do. I hope you and your dad enjoy the house. Just so you know, the property taxes are due next month, $847. The insurance premium renews in 6 weeks, $423 per month. The pool maintenance contract needs renewal in March, $180 per month, and the premium cable package you can't live without runs $89 per month. Your dad will figure it out. Good luck with everything. Sarah. Then I got in my car and drove away from 3 years of my life without looking back. My sister's place was small but felt like a palace after 3 years of walking on eggshells. That first night, I sat on her couch with a cup of tea, listening to her rage on my behalf about David and Madison, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, peace. I can't believe you put up with that for so long, Rachel said for the third time. That girl was absolutely toxic, and David was enabling every bit of it. I kept thinking it would get better. That if I just tried harder, was more patient, more understanding. You can't fix people who don't want to be fixed. And you definitely can't buy love from people who see your generosity as weakness. 2 weeks later, my lawyer called with an update. David had agreed to all my terms without negotiation, which told me everything I needed to know about how worried he was about his extracurricular activities coming to light in divorce proceedings. The check arrived 3 days after that. $47,312. More than enough for a down payment on my own place, with plenty left over to get my life started again. I found a perfect little townhouse about 20 minutes from my office, 2 bedrooms, updated kitchen, small backyard, and best of all, no teenagers who saw me as an inconvenience to be tolerated. The mortgage payment was actually less than what I'd been paying David, which meant I'd have extra money for the first time in years. Money for things I wanted instead of things other people expected me to provide. Janet, my real estate agent, was thrilled with how quickly everything came together. It's like this place was waiting for you, she said as we signed the final papers. Perfect timing, perfect fit. Perfect place for someone who finally knew where she belonged. The first month in my new house was a revelation. I could eat my own food without worrying about it disappearing. I could watch what I wanted on TV without negotiating for remote control privileges. I could decorate however I wanted without considering anyone else's preferences. I bought expensive sheets and didn't have to share them. I stocked my refrigerator with things I actually liked instead of things that would make other people happy. I came home from work to silence and peace instead of tension and unspoken resentment. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was living in my own life instead of being a supporting character in someone else's story. You want to know the really funny part? About a month after I moved out, Madison started calling me. Not to apologize, heaven forbid, but to complain about how much stricter David had become now that he was handling everything alone. He's being so unfair, she whined during one particularly pathetic phone call. He says we can't afford for me to go to that summer leadership camp in Colorado anymore, and that I need to get a part-time job if I want spending money. It's like he doesn't even care about my future. I made appropriately sympathetic noises while internally laughing my head off. That sounds really challenging, Madison. I mean, I know you and Dad are getting divorced and everything, but couldn't you still help out sometimes? For my sake? You know how important my senior year is, and now everything's different and stressful. The audacity was breathtaking. The sheer, unmitigated gall of this girl asking me to continue financially supporting a household I'd been told I didn't belong in was almost admirable in its complete lack of self-awareness. Madison, I said gently, remember when you told me I needed to know my place? Yeah, but I didn't mean, well, I took your advice. My place isn't paying for things in a house where I'm not wanted. You wanted it to be just you and your dad? Now it is. You'll figure it out. But that's not fair. I'm still just a kid, and your dad is still your parent. The one who's actually responsible for providing for you. I kept my voice pleasant but firm. I'm not your mother, Madison. I never was, despite trying very hard to fill that role. You made it clear that my contributions weren't wanted or appreciated, so I stopped making them. I was just upset that day. I didn't mean you should leave forever. You meant exactly what you said. And you were right, I didn't belong there. I glanced around my sunny kitchen, at the coffee mug I'd left on the counter that morning without worrying someone else would move it, at the leftover pizza in my fridge that would still be there when I wanted it. But I belong here. I hung up before she could respond, and blocked her number. Some lessons you have to learn the hard way, and some bridges burned so completely that trying to rebuild them is just wasting everyone's time. 6 months later, I was settled into my new life and loving every minute of it. My townhouse was exactly what I needed, quiet, comfortable, and completely mine. I'd even started dating again, though I was taking things very slowly this time. Marcus was a software engineer I'd met at a work conference, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who remembered details and asked follow-up questions. He'd been divorced too, but his ex-wife had moved across the country and taken their kids, so there was no complicated family dynamic to navigate. It's nice to be able to focus on just us, he said one evening as we cooked dinner together in my kitchen. No teenagers to worry about, no ex-drama. Just two adults figuring out if we're compatible. I told him the whole story, of course, the financial manipulation, the hostile stepdaughter, the husband who'd checked out of the marriage long before I'd checked out of the house. Marcus had listened with a kind of thoughtful attention that made me remember what it felt like to have someone actually care about my experience. She really told you it wasn't your house? He asked, shaking his head. After 3 years of you paying for everything? Every month like clockwork. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, you name it. I stirred the sauce we were making, enjoying the simple pleasure of cooking for someone who appreciated my efforts. But apparently contributing financially doesn't make it your home if the people living there don't want you to belong. Good thing you're smart enough to know when you're being taken advantage of. That's when I got the text from David. Not Madison, David himself, swallowing his pride to reach out to the woman he'd let his daughter drive away. Sarah, I know I have no right to ask, but Madison's really struggling. She's been different since you left, angrier, more difficult. The divorce hit her harder than I thought it would. She's been asking about you, and I think she wants to apologize. Would you be willing to meet with her? Just for coffee or something? I think it might help her process everything. I stared at that text for a long time, imagining all the different ways I could respond. I could ignore it completely. I could tell him exactly what I thought of his parenting and his daughter's selective remorse. I could point out that Madison wasn't struggling because of a divorce, she was struggling because actions have consequences, something she was apparently learning for the first time in her privileged life. Instead, I wrote back, my place is in my own life now, David. Madison made it very clear that I wasn't part of your family. I'm not going to keep moving in and out of that role based on when it's convenient for her. He tried calling after that, but I didn't answer. Some bridges don't get rebuilt, especially when they were burned deliberately by someone who was old enough to know better. A few days later, another text arrived. She's really sorry, Sarah. She knows she was wrong. Could you at least give her a chance to explain? I showed the message to Marcus, who'll read it with a frown. What do you think? He asked. I think she's sorry she's facing consequences, not sorry for her behavior. I deleted the message without responding. There's a difference. You don't think people can change? I think 17-year-olds can definitely change. But I also think some relationships get damaged beyond repair, and trying to fix them just hurts everyone involved. I curled up next to him on my couch, in my house, with my rules. Madison spent 3 years training me to accept less, expect less, be less. I'm not going back to that dynamic just because she's finally learning what my contributions were actually worth. Marcus kissed the top of my head. Sounds like you know your place pretty well now. I laughed. I do. And it's nowhere near them. A year later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that David had sold the house, couldn't afford the payments on his own, apparently, and moved into a smaller place across town. Madison was working part-time at a local coffee shop to help with expenses, and word was she developed quite the attitude about having to contribute to household costs. She's furious about having to work, my former neighbor told me when we ran into each other at the grocery store. Keeps complaining that it's not fair she has to pay for her own car insurance and gas money. David looks exhausted all the time. I felt a tiny pang of something that might have been sympathy. Then I remembered standing in that kitchen, staring at an empty fridge after a 14-hour workday, listening to a 17-year-old tell me I was just here. Well, I said, loading organic vegetables into my cart, the expensive ones I could now afford because I was only feeding myself. Actions have consequences. David asked me to give you his new address in case you ever wanted to reach out. That's thoughtful, but I'm good. Funny how knowing your place can be so liberating. These days, I'm engaged to Marcus, who thinks I hung the moon and tells me so regularly. We're planning a small wedding next spring, just close friends and family, people who actually want us to be happy. He has no children from previous relationships, which suits me fine. I've learned that blended families work beautifully when everyone involved actually wants to blend. When they don't, well, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is remove yourself from the equation entirely. Madison's in college now, community college, from what I hear, since the expensive 4-year schools she'd been planning on were no longer financially feasible after David's income became the only income supporting their household. She tried reaching out to me on social media a few times, probably hoping I'd be willing to help with tuition or living expenses. I never responded. Some places, once you leave them, you don't go back to. But sometimes, late at night when I'm curled up in my own home with my fiancé and our 2 rescue cats, I think about that moment in her doorway. The look on her face when she told me to know my place, so confident that I'd just take it and shrink back into whatever corner she'd mentally assigned me to occupy. She'd been so sure of her power, so certain that I needed them more than they needed me. So convinced that I'd never have the courage to actually leave, because where would I go? What would I do? How would I manage without their grudging acceptance? I wonder if she ever thinks about it too. If she ever realizes that telling someone to know their place is a dangerous game, because they might just decide their place is somewhere you can't control them. Somewhere you can't reach them. Somewhere you can't hurt them anymore. I wonder if she learned anything from watching her father struggle to maintain the lifestyle I've been subsidizing, or if she just got better at hiding her resentment about having to contribute to her own upkeep. I wonder if David ever told her the truth about why I left so quickly, so completely, with so little drama. If he explained that I'd been 3 steps ahead of his lies and manipulations, that I'd known about the affairs and the financial deception long before that final conversation. Probably not. Men like David prefer narratives where they're the victims of unreasonable women rather than the architects of their own destruction. But it doesn't matter what they think or what they learned or whether they ever understood the role their behavior played in dismantling our family. What matters is that I finally understood my own worth, my own power, my own right to be somewhere I was genuinely wanted. I knew my place, all right. It was somewhere I was valued, respected, and genuinely appreciated. It just took Madison pointing out that it wasn't with them for me to finally go find it. And you know what? I've never been happier to be exactly where I belong. The best part is that now, when people ask me about stepmothering or blended families, I can give them real advice: know your worth. Set your boundaries. And if someone tells you to know your place, make sure your place is somewhere they can't diminish you. Because the most dangerous thing you can say to someone who's been underestimated their whole life is that they don't belong where they are. Sometimes they'll surprise you by agreeing, and taking all their contributions with them when they go.